In this short video, I will try to explain to you the different types of float and how to recognize them and work with them on Primavera P6. First of all, we have four types of float. We have total float, free float, and we have shared float and independent float. So let's talk about each one and start learning more information about it. So total float, as you all might know, it's the amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the project completion date. Once the total float equal to 0, that means the activity is critical. Any delay on it will delay the project completion date. So here, once it's 0, it's critical. That's very obvious. Let's talk about the next one, which is the free float. Free float is the amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the earliest start date of any of its successors. So if we talk about, for example, let's take this activity. So in this activity, we have the shingle roof. This activity have one successor, which is installing drywall. So we need to see that the early start date here is not affecting our dates for the activity we are studying. So installing drywall, we have an early start of September 24th. Okay, so if we saw here the early finish, which is right here, it's September 18, and from September 18 at the end of the day, so we have 19 and we have 20, 21, 22, 23, and then this one will start 24. We have 5 days. 5 days of free float. That means this activity, if this activity was delayed by 5 days, it will still not affect the activity that comes after it. So that's free float. And of course, neither of all these types of float will give you a higher number than the total float. Total float has to be the biggest number or the biggest float on any activity. So now we have described two types of float. Let's talk about something called shared float. To talk about shared float, I will introduce you to this same activity on nodes. It's the same as the activity list we have seen earlier, but just here it will be more clear. So once we see here, we see the critical path. It's very clear, and we see here the shared float is actually like a path of some series of activities, and these series of activities, they share an amount of float together. Once one of them consumes this amount, the other one will be critical. If the first one consumes some, the other one will have the remaining. So it's very important to recognize that and to see that these activities, you have to know exactly how much you have consumed, so not both of them will have the same or the total float that you can see. Let's see how this one works. We have two activities here. These two activities, install siding and paint exterior. If we replace these two activities by one big activity, you can see it will look the same. Why? Because each one of them having only one predecessor and one successor. This is for this case and also for this case. So this is how we spot the shared float activities. So this activity having a total float, we get it here from the legend, of 8 days. And the next one, paint exterior, also having 8 days. So both of them having only one predecessor and one successor, and they have the same amount of total float. That means both of them, the two of them together having these 8 days, not each one having 8 days. This is something you have to be aware of. as I told you earlier, just imagine if you replace these two activities by one activity having 7 days of duration. 4 plus 3, which is the duration. So this is the shared float. Shared float here, which is right here in the legend. That means having 8 days, you have to know that if the first one consumed 8 days, it will end on 29th. This one will have in the late start. The late start will be 29, so it will be critical. You have to be careful about it. So let's talk about the last type of float, which is the independent float. Independent float means an amount of time, an activity can be delayed without delaying the earliest start date of any of its successors. Up until here, that's the definition of the free float. But we keep going and saying, or the late finish date of any of its predecessors. Let's see how this one works. So if we look at this activity, which is break front side. Break front side having a total float of 10 days. We can see here this activity, it's supposed to having early finish on 22nd and having a late finish on 32, and the activity right after it, which is the finish electrical, is already a critical activity, which is having same early start and late start. So if we see this case here, this activity will have no impact on the early start date, because in other words, it will mean there is no float here. No, I have nothing to, like, I cannot be delayed, because this one is 32, this one is 32. So if I compare the late finish with the early start, it will have nothing. But I supposed to look at the early dates. If we look at the early dates, we will get from here 10 days. 10 days, this one is 32, this one is 22. That means this activity having free float of 10 days, which you can see right here. So that's good so far. Free float is 10 days. But this is from this part only on the right hand side. Let's talk about the predecessor case. In the predecessor case, if you look at the windows and doors, what about the late finish, which is a definition? If we call the definition of the independent float an amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the early start of any of its successors, or the latest finish date of any of its predecessors. So we have only one predecessor. We take the latest finish date, which is 20. So if we say here that's 20 and we have 27. So 20 and 27, if you look at them together, you can see here there's 7 days. So that means these 7 days belongs only to that activity. So this activity having independent float of 7 days just for this activity only. And what about the 3 remaining from the 10 days of total float? These 3 days is shared with the windows and doors activity. So if the windows and doors activity did not consume the 3 days, that means break front side will have 10 days just for itself. And if this one consumed 3, this one will have the remaining of 7. So this shows you how shared float works with independent float. So to recall again, we have here having 10 and here having 7. So we take the 7, which is the independent float. We have only independent float of 7 days, which you can see here in the legend, and we have 3 shared float you can see here. How we spot this activity on Primavera P6? If we go back to Primavera P6 and we look at this activity, break front side. If we look at this activity, we will see that from the successor case, which give us the free float, we subtract the early finish here, the the early from the activity break front side, having an early finish of September 22nd. Okay, and this one having also early start of October 3rd. So we have here 10 days. Okay, having 10 days here, that means that's this activity having free float of 10 days. So if we look at the predecessor case, we will find out that when we look at the predecessor, we look at the late dates. So the late dates here, we will look at the latest finish, which is September 20th. When we look at the September 20th, and we have in our case for the early start, having early start of September sorry, the late, sorry, we'll talk about late dates. So September 20th, and we have a late start of September 28th. So from September 20 and September 28, we have here 7 days, and these are 7 days, they're not 8 days, because you can see here that's September 20 at 4 p.m. That's the end of the day. So we have starting from September 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. These are 7 days until the end of the 7th day, and then the late start will be for the next activity will be September on the beginning of 28th at 8 in the morning. So having 7 days of independent float, and the remaining of 3 days of float is shared with this activity, which is windows and doors. I hope you understand the meaning and how to work with float in Primavera. It's very important to know and to know the float and which activity it belongs to and what type of float you are dealing with. It will affect your schedule. I hope this was beneficial for you, and you can get back and ask me about anything you want, and I hope I will see you soon in the next video.